is going on, all you wonderful A-plussers out there? It is I, Stuart, here once again with another review, this time with Stargirl Season 3's premiere. And yeah, if you guys didn't know the show was back, well, guess what? You're not alone, because the marketing for the season has unfortunately been absolutely terrible, and I didn't even realize the show was back. In fact, I thought it was coming back this week and not last week, but Stargirl is officially back, and I'll try to be more efficient with my reviews, getting them out either the day after or the day after that. So within a 2-day period, basically. I know it's not like other channels who are able to have it like, you know, the day that it premieres. Unfortunately, me not having cable, it's a lot harder for me to watch the episode on time because the CW app is extremely unreliable when it comes to getting the episodes up on time. So for now, I don't really have a official schedule yet for the Stargirl reviews, but I can kind of guarantee that, like, my episode reviews will come out before the next episode comes out, if that makes sense. So I will have this episode review up before episode 2 premieres. I can guarantee you that at the very least for now. But yeah, with that all being said, it's really time to get into this episode and break it down. And yeah, guys, this was quite the season premiere, and I think I really enjoyed it. Definitely, much like season 2's premiere, it really gave you like a good idea of what you can expect from the rest of the season. You know, season 2 definitely had a very creepy horror feeling opening, and then this episode really kind of gives off a, you know, really fun murder mystery vibe, which is exactly what it's going for. It introduces us to all the characters that are still currently living in Blue Valley. Well, actually there is one exception, but I'll get to that at the very end of this review. And so it really just kind of goes out of its way to introduce everyone, and also kind of shows you what certain motivations certain characters may have for why they do what they do. But one of those characters that we see at the very end is the Gambler, who we didn't see in season 2, but we did see as like one of the JSA members that escaped at the very end of season 1. And so he's back in Blue Valley, and he looks like he has no intention of leaving anytime soon. And he has this, you know, a lot of people want to immediately kind of assume that he must be clearly the murderer, or the person that, you know, is going to be like one of the main antagonists of the season. But one of the cool visuals that they show us is he actually picks up some litter that he sees on the ground, which is kind of a cool reflection of season 1, where we see that he was a bit of a litter bug, definitely didn't really care about leaving his own trash anywhere. You know, very much a guy who is in it for himself and doesn't really care about the ramifications about how it affects other people. And again, we're going to get a little bit more into that when we talk a little bit more about his character later on. But we then cut to the Whitmore family, who are now back from their summer vacation camping trip. And what's cool is we get a little bit of an Easter egg with the comic book tie-in. So those of you who read the Earth Prime comic books totally probably know exactly what this is. So really cool. Like, I know the comic books are canon, but it's really nice to have that extra confirmation, you know, in the show itself. We also have Stargirl and Starman, you know, trying to get to know each other. Starman is basically trying to kind of show off like a new display case that he has for the staff, but it worries Courtney because he decides to put it right next to his bed, which, of course, you know, it's Courtney's staff, so of course she takes like a little offense to that, and she just kind of straight up asks him, you know, I know you said that you're not here for the staff, but if you change your mind, could you just tell me now? And it almost feels like Courtney's kind of ready to be let down by Starman, very much in the same way that she, you know, she doesn't want to get caught off guard in the same way that she was with her dad. How it seemed like her dad, when he came to visit her, like he was there to, you know, be in her life again, but then it turned out he was just interested in the locket and nothing else. And she's worried that it might be the same thing with Starman. Like, he claims he's there to be a friend, but in actuality he's just there because he wants the staff. So Courtney doesn't want to like outright accuse him of that, but she does want to like kind of double confirm with herself, so she doesn't get let down in the same way she did before. We also see the Crocs still living, you know, just down the street from the Whitmore family, trying to, you know, seemingly live their lives as, you know, just regular, upstanding citizens. But of course, you have a little bit of a discourse between Pat and Courtney, arguing about whether or not the Crocs can actually be trusted. Courtney feels like they should be able to trust them just fine, whereas, you know, Pat is a little more on edge about the whole thing. And I gotta admit, I'm a little more on Pat's side side. It's not like he's necessarily saying they need to be locked up again, which also kind of brings up another question that I'll bring up later on. But, he's also saying that they should keep their guard up around them, and I do kind of agree with him on that. So Pat simply wants to lock the door, and Courtney wants to show that she trusts them by keeping the door unlocked. And I know they live in a very small town and everything, but honestly, I feel like it doesn't hurt to just lock the door regardless of whether or not you trust your neighbors. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's because I live in the city, so I'm used to that, but it's just, it's one of those things where I'm definitely on Pat's side, only because Pat isn't straight up on the side of not trusting the Crocs at all. He's just more about keeping his guard up around them. But then the gambler comes in, and both Courtney and Pat seem to be on the same page about not trusting him, even though he seems to be there to make amends. And we find out that the reason that he wants to make amends here is because he supposedly just found out that he has a daughter. And this daughter is actually a character from the comic books. In fact, we've actually seen her, I believe it was on The Flash season 4. So it would be kind of funny if we do actually get to see her again in Stargirl. Probably she would be played by a younger actress, so probably not the same one, because it's kind of implied that his daughter is probably really young still. But regardless, it is kind of cool that they're planting the seeds for future characters that we might be able to see later on down the line. But we also get a reveal during this scene that the Whitmores are currently under surveillance. By whom, we don't know, but I have a very strong idea that it's probably Mr. Bones, the same guy that we got introduced to at the end of the last season. Although if I had to make a guess, I don't think he's going to be the murderer that the characters are looking for. I feel like the murderer is going to be someone we've seen in this episode, which brings me back to something I brought up earlier, which is the idea that we get an introduction or reintroduction, I guess, to everyone living in Blue Valley, with the exception of Cameron, aka the son of Icicle, so aka Icicle Jr. We don't really see any of him in this episode, which also leads people to think that maybe he could be the murderer at the end of the episode. But for me, I feel like when you're doing a murder mystery, the best way to write it and the best way to get the audience engaged is to just introduce all the people who it could possibly be in the first episode. So for me, I'm also going to kind of cross Cameron off my list of suspects currently. But continuing on from there, we see that Crusher, of all people, is not happy that Pat had a conversation with the gambler, and he basically warns Pat not to trust him, which, of course, I know a lot of people are definitely going to point out the irony here, because, obviously Crusher himself was a supervillain at one point, but the big thing here is that he did kind of have a redemption arc at the end of the last season, same with his wife and daughter, with all of them kind of teaming up together to stop Eclipso. We then see the gambler continuing to make amends, this time with the Shade, of all people, which we never really saw the two of them interacting with each other. So to me, this was kind of a cool moment, especially because the two of them have that thing in common where they both really like to dress extremely fancy and act like, they're just kind of above everyone, if that makes sense. But the Shade has a huge distrust for the gambler, and we know a small part of it from this conversation has to do with the gambler essentially closing down all of the Shade's accounts, apparently, and basically making him worth absolutely nothing. So we know that's a small part of it, but we don't know anything really beyond that. But we do see that the scene ends with the Shade threatening the gambler to leave by using his powers, but not really having a lot of control over his powers. It looks like it takes him extra time to clear out his eyes from all the Shade, literally engulfing it. But then we get a little spark at the end of it too, a spark of green light, which looks like one of two things. It kind of looks similar to Iris's time sickness from The Flash, although I highly doubt that's what he has, because again, even though they are kind of connected in the same multiverse, I don't really see any storylines from The Flash really crossing over into Stargirl anytime soon. And also on top of this, the other thing I think it could be is that in some way it could be related to the Green Lantern, because we do still have the Green Lantern's daughter as a character within this universe. Now, whether or not we're going to see more of her in this season is still up in the air, but it wouldn't surprise me too much if if the green light that we see here was somehow tied to her powers going forward, especially again kind of going towards the fact that we know Mr. Bones is going to have a part to play later on in the season. So I wouldn't doubt if somehow there's like a weird clash between the Shaden and the Green Lantern's daughter, but I guess that's going to be like a wait and see. We then cut to, the JSA kind of meeting at school for a lunch, and of course Sydney kind of inviting herself to the table, and the team really having like a lot of debates among themselves of whether or not Sydney should even be joining the JSA. Of course, Courtney and Beth are all for it, but we got Wildcat and Hourman being like not really as trusting as the two of them with Sydney. And plus, it's like safe to say that the two of them also have like history with Sydney, just even before she was a supervillain. They have like, high school history with her that wasn't good. So it makes sense that the two of them aren't very trusting of Sydney going forward. But we then get Artemis, who seemingly has already invited herself onto the JSA without bringing it up to them at all. But of course, that's something where it's almost like the entire team really is against this, including both Courtney and Beth. But that's going to be a wait and see going forward. We cut back to Starman and Pat, both of them, really bonding for the first time in a while and doing their first Starman and Stripes adventure in a long time. And this kind of worries the Whitmore family, especially Courtney, because like I said at the beginning, she's just afraid of getting burned again the same way her father did to him, her father did to her, and so she's just afraid Starman is going to do the same thing. But there's kind of a compromise kind of to prevent something like that from happening. So even though he does, again, like I say, try to assure Courtney that he doesn't want the staff, she makes a deal with him that basically he can have the staff while she's in school if she can have it, for the rest of the day afterwards while she's, actually being Stargirl. And he seemingly seems to be okay with this idea and seems to be really excited to teach her new things with the staff, things that Pat never would be able to because he was never able to wield the staff the same way the two of them were. We then cut to Stargirl and her friends basically interrupting a group that are a gang that's basically trying to rob a truck, like one of those armored money trucks that usually deliver money to different businesses that usually work for a bank. I forgot what they're called. I'm sorry. That's a really long sentence for explaining something very simple. But anyways, they find out that this gang is related to the Gambler. So obviously he becomes like their number one suspect of who's kind of like leading this mission with them. But before they can have a chance to question them, Artemis basically kind of comes in and kicks all of their asses, which kind of makes me think that this gang was actually hired by the Crocs themselves, and that they wanted to give their daughter like an opportunity to prove herself to the JSA. So I don't think, even though they all have been associated with the Gambler, I don't think the Gambler is the one who hired them. And I think, again, it's just meant to be another red herring. I don't think it's going to be directly involved with the overall murder that we see in the episode. We then get kind of a moment between Pat and Starman, and we get this reveal too with Starman. It was actually revealed earlier, but I forgot to bring it up, that Starman actually did come back for the staff, but when he saw that the staff had actually chosen someone, and someone who was really good at her job seemingly, that's when he decided to back off and let her have the staff. However, it brings up a new problem, which is that Starman doesn't really have anything to fall back on. He doesn't really have a family or a life or anything like that. And so you have this kind of interesting jealousy kind of with Starman, where he's like kind of both impressed and very sad that he doesn't have that same life that Pat has. Pat having like a full-on family now, like a kid of his own, and then his stepdaughter, and then being married to Courtney's mother. There's almost like a little bit of a jealousy there, not like a petty type of jealousy, but more of like what would the word be? Basically just kind of like, you could tell that Starman wishes that he could have had what Pat had, he'd not been killed and then, randomly brought back from the staff. That was another thing I also forgot to bring up about the episode, is that Starman does get brought back to life from the staff, but it's not clear to him or to us as an audience of how exactly that works. So there might be a little bit more to it than that we're going to learn about later on, but who knows? We'll definitely have to wait and see when we get there. We then finally get to the last part of the episode, which is the gambler trying to reach out to his daughter when he suddenly discovers that the surveillance footage that we saw at the very beginning of the episode, it wasn't just limited to the Whitmore residence. It was actually basically set for all the JSA members and all of their houses, and I believe it included the supervillains living in Blue Valley as well, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But regardless, the gambler goes outside to investigate when the JSA are also heading to the gambler's place because, of course, they have to go question him about the gang earlier. And as they're about to do this, there's suddenly a roar, a lot of commotion, and as they arrive to his trailer that he was living in, we see it's completely destroyed and that the gambler is dead with the sound of a gunshot. And then we see Sydney is the one holding the gun, but she claims that she didn't do it. So overall, this was definitely a really exciting episode. A lot of mystery going on. And again, I wish I had a list of suspects, but at this point in the episode, I have no idea who did it or why. They give perfect motivation for it to have been pretty much anyone. And, this is the type of writing I love when it comes to murder mysteries. So I definitely look forward to seeing how this all gets unwrapped later on as we move forward in this series. And if you guys have any predictions as to who might have killed the gambler, definitely let me know in the comments below. All right, episode number 2. Now, full disclosure, I was not originally planning on reviewing episodes 1 and 2 side by side like this, but unfortunately I had some issues with some of my editing programs, so before I can get it back up and running, I figured since it was going to take me a while to do so, it might just be a better idea to do episode 1 and 2 as like one video, and then going forward, you can basically kind of expect like future Stargirl reviews to be up either this day, like at this time, or hopefully the day before if I can get lucky and hopefully get my recordings done early. But again, it's going to be kind of a wait and see for now. But finally I got my first 2 Stargirl episode reviews up now, so that's a good thing. But with that all being said, let's get into my thoughts on episode 2. So episode 2 was a little bit slower than episode 1, kind of. I'd say like in terms of plot, not really much happened, but in terms of story, we do get a little bit. Like in the very beginning here, we get kind of a recontextualization. Is that a word? Basically the beginning is like recontextualized with the gambler. We already saw this bit play out basically in episode 1, but here we find out that the person that was originally kind of watching him and then driving away was actually one of the Crocs, Sportsmaster himself. But even though it looked like he was kind of getting ready to essentially threaten or, possibly even kill the gambler, it did seem like he had kind of cold feet at the end, and that was why he ended up driving away. So it wasn't whoever was surveilling Blue Valley, or at least I don't think it was, because obviously I'm pretty sure it's safe to say at this point the Crocs aren't the one who are surveilling Blue Valley, but I guess that's a wait and see, because again, I'm still going with the idea that it's likely Mr. Bones who's going to be doing that, especially because of him being teased at the very end of the previous season. But regardless, we do see that most of the suspects that you probably would have had from the first episode were actually at the gambler's place, just kind of cementing the idea that there's even a bigger chance that they could be the ones who ended up killing him. But something to point out that I forgot to mention last week is that these 2 episodes actually have titles now. Chapter 1 being The Murderer, and then Chapter 2 being The Suspects. I bring this up just because last year, I believe, I was complaining that like every episode was basically called Summer School Chapter 1, Summer School Chapter 2. At least here we have like the title for the whole season, kind of like last season where it was, last season was of course Summer School, this season it's Frenemies. But I do like how now they have the subtitles for, the season title. So even though it's called Stargirl Frenemies, the full title can be Stargirl Frenemies Chapter 1, The Murderer Chapter 2, The Suspects. It's a lot better than just calling it Frenemies Chapter 1, Frenemies Chapter 2, But that all being said, so we cut back to present time, and they're having a meeting on whether or not Cindy is guilty or who their suspect should be on who killed the gambler. Now, of course, Courtney is really defensive for it being Cindy, saying that her excuses that sound really, really, well, like excuses, She seems to try to be rational, want to rationalize a lot of them and say that they make a lot of sense, but of course everyone is pretty doubtful, including Pat and Beth. Now, I think like what's kind of interesting about the dynamic here is that you kind of got Sylvester, Rick, and Yolanda, who are very much on the idea of Cindy being guilty, or at the very least not being trusting at all. And then you got Courtney Whitmore, who's kind of that one character that's like a bit too trusting, whereas like Pat and Beth, I kind of see them as like the neutral party, the middle ground, the ones that are like, hey, you know, it's great that you see the good in everyone, Courtney, but we can't just dismiss them because they say that they want to change, you know. So that's one of the big things that we're kind of looking at with this episode is, you know, how trusting should you be, you know, because you want to give people the benefit of the doubt to a certain extent, but you also don't want to just, you know, on like constantly believe them when, you know, they're a very clear suspect, if that makes sense. And one thing to kind of bring up in this episode is that I don't think Cindy did it, but as we'll definitely talk about at the very end, I also think it's very clear she's not telling the truth about what happened when she found the gambler's body, that she knows a lot more than she's letting on, but for one reason or another she's keeping it a secret from everyone. And that's coming purely from the standpoint of just me as a TV viewer. Obviously, I feel like if I was living in this world and I knew everything that was going on, I feel like Sydney would be my number one suspect. But viewing it purely as a television show, knowing that usually the person who finds the body is the least likely person to actually be the killer, well, you know, just because that would be the least interesting, you know, plot twist you could go with that. So with that being said, I do think that Sydney saw a lot more than she's letting on. I still am kind of, for now anyways, going on off the idea that she isn't the one who killed him though. But one thing to kind of note about this moment here is that we do see that Cindy does have, you know, experiments being done on herself, but it doesn't seem to be to make herself stronger. It seems to be to keep her alive, because we kind of see that she's in a little bit of pain. Now, like a lot of people might look at the scene and say that maybe she was in pain from finding the gambler or whatever killed the gambler, and that's very possible too. But I'm kind of going right now on the assumption that, you know, what she's taken might be something she has to take because of her just condition, and overall like the experiments that her dad did for her were probably came out at a side. They probably came with a side effect, basically, like if she doesn't drink this purple stuff like every week or so, like maybe she dies, something along those lines. We then get back to Courtney and Pat, and what's interesting here is that Courtney seems to really want to believe that the gambler was going to change for reasons that make a lot of sense. She's looking at the letter that the gambler wrote for her daughter, for his daughter, and you know, there's a bit of a sadness to her, because she realizes, you know, or she says to Pat that this is something that she wishes that her dad could have done for her. And, you know, you kind of get this subtext of how weird it is that the gambler, being an actual supervillain, seems to care more about her daughter than, you know, Courtney's dad, who isn't even a supervillain. He's just a total asshole. So it was definitely a really cool moment, and you definitely totally understand why Courtney cares so much about finding out who actually killed the gambler. We then get like kind of a fun side plot with Mike and Jakeem, where it's the two of them trying to kind of solve the mystery themselves using the genie. But of course, you know, much like most of the wishes that we constantly see them making, it doesn't work the way they were hoping. And the answer to who killed the gambler is the killer has many names. Now, I think like the first person that kind of comes to my mind when it comes to this is Sportsmaster, because he also likes to go by Crusher, and then he also has his regular name, which if I'm being honest, I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But Sportsmaster definitely fits that profile the most out of all the characters that we currently know in Stargirl. But I guess there is technically another character who could fit that profile, and I'll get to him when we get there. But we also have another side plot when it comes to Tigress and Barb. Essentially, it's a little bit more of Tigress trying to become best friends with Barb. Barb, you know, kind of hesitantly, like, you know, allowing her in her life, but then also Tigress trying to explain that she and her husband are innocent, they didn't kill the gambler. And something I kind of love about this is that it's really hard to tell sometimes when she's actually just trying to have a friendly conversation and when she's trying to threaten someone. Like, it kind of comes off the same way. Same with Crusher in a lot of ways. Like, like there was a whole scene in the previous episode very similar to how this plays out, where Crusher was trying to tell Pat not to trust the gambler, and you couldn't tell if he was like trying to be friendly, but it comes off as threatening, or if he was just subliminally trying to threaten Pat. And that's kind of the same thing, the same kind of vibe you get here. Something I absolutely love is her trying to kind of blend in, and one of the things she mentions is that she actually smiles a lot more, and we see her smile, and it's just like the most like I'm in pain type of smile that you could ever see, like the kind where you're just like, if you were having a conversation with her, you would actually be trying really hard not to make jokes, because you'd be like, oh god, anything to stop you from giving me that weird look, no. But we then cut back to school, where they're all having a meeting about what to do going forward, and Sydney is a little bit upset that she wasn't invited to the meeting the night before, as she knows that it's because they all think that she's a suspect. Now, she's not as defensive here, and I think it's, kind of going back to what I was mentioning earlier. She's clearly not telling the full truth, so I think like a part of her just kind of realizes she actually can't be too mad at them for not trusting her at this point, because even though she beforehand has seemingly been doing everything she could to get their trust, here at this point she really hasn't been doing much. In fact, the fact that she's lied about the whole thing, as far as we can see, I feel like that's probably why she's not as defensive about being a suspect here, because she's like, I think inside she kind of knows, well, they really don't have a reason to trust me, and I don't have anything that can prove that I'm innocent at the moment. So the most I can do is just not get mad and keep my cool, I think is what's going through her mind at the moment. But then we get like the interrogation scene where the Shade becomes Starman's first suspect, and you get Starman kind of trying to go back to the way things were with him, being the hero and then Pat being the sidekick. But one thing I really do like is that Pat is definitely kind of being a lot more assertive with himself. So you get this moment where clearly Starman is like trying to tell Pat, don't sit next to me, just stand there, like a good sidekick. But like Pat isn't like kind of taking that, so he just kind of like gets Starman to actually move over, and you have like this bit of annoyance in his face, like just like, really, Pat? But I really like it. You get like in this interrogation scene, the Shade, it feels more like the Shade is just, he knows that Starman isn't this hero that everyone looks at him as, and it's almost like he's trying to get people to see that, but he's not trying to just, tell them, hey, you guys shouldn't trust Starman, he's an asshole. He's trying to show it by, subliminally getting into Starman's head, causing him to kind of like lose his cool in the diner. Pat breaks it up, which of course, really pisses Starman off, because he's like, you're my sidekick, and this is where Pat kind of just, straight up tells him that's not how it works anymore. We can't just do things the old way, especially not in a town like this. So I really, again, I do like that Pat is being a lot more assertive, but still being the very kind-hearted character that we knew from, the other two seasons. Although we do know that there is a bit more darkness within Pat because of something we saw in season 2. So I'm curious, if we get more scenes with Sylvester and Pat together, I'm curious when we're gonna, get to see a lot more of that in Pat going forward. We also get a cool kind of training moment where Sylvester is trying to teach Courtney a few more tricks with the staff, and we see him kind of going Super Saiyan. Like, I don't know what else to call it. Basically, he says it's bringing in all of your positive energy, letting it kind of fuel up the staff and himself, and then just like as soon as you get kind of enough, just like let it burst, and it makes you kind of a shooting star. And he teaches that to Courtney, and it doesn't work at first, because Courtney's like trying not to screw up, and just kind of being nervous about it is what makes it hard to do. But then as she kind of looks back at actual positive moments in her life, suddenly the staff is able to light up just fine, and yeah, she takes off kind of the same way as Pat. Now, Sylvester. Now, Sylvester and Courtney try one more time to kind of interrogate the Shade, but apologize first, trying to be more professional about it. But of course, the Shade, once again kind of gets into Sylvester's head, and by basically kind of saying that Pat was the only one at his funeral, whereas the JSA all had family members that were there, which of course, once again causes him to lose his cool. So as he's about to attack the Shade, Courtney stops him by basically taking the staff back. And what we get next, and this is where I kind of realized there's a really interesting dynamic between Starman and Stargirl. Because I thought what we were going to kind of have going into the season was almost like kind of a two dad scenario, whereas like Courtney now has two mentor figures to look up to, and she doesn't know which one to trust at which moment. But really, kind of looking back at this scene, it kind of comes off more as like a big brother kind of relationship that the two of them have. He basically kind of wants to teach her stuff, but not everything he's about to teach her is necessarily good. Like for example, like just even training her in order to get her to start training, they basically ended up ditching school, or he ended up getting her to ditch school so he could train her. Which of course, one thing that Pat says is that even though you can be Stargirl, being Stargirl doesn't mean your life as Courtney gets to go away like that. So there's kind of a little bit more of her trying to realize that Pat is kind of her father figure, and that while it's great to get some training and learn some things from Starman, it's probably not smart to just try to listen to everything that he says and take it 100% as it is. Basically, kind of like with most big brothers, they're going to teach you good things and they're going to teach you bad things, and then it's kind of up to you as you grow up to decide which is which, if that makes sense. So we then get a scene with Beth and Rick, or Rick, or is that his dad's name? I totally forgot. As you can kind of tell, I'm really bad with names, so I apologize. But kind of off topic, I'm not much of a shipper, but if the showrunners wanted to do a ship between Hourman and Beth, I would actually, I wouldn't be against that, just saying, because we get a lot of scenes where it's just the two of them together, and I don't know, there's just something there that I think they could explore later on going down the line. But of course, the show really isn't like as much about relationships as other CW shows, so it may just stay as a platonic friendship between the two of them, but we'll have to wait and see. But regardless, as one thing that we find out in the scene is that, of course, not only is Solomon Grundy still dead, but essentially he's trying to figure out how to fix the hourglass. But the biggest issue is that even though it works, it gives him super strength once a day, it's not always consistent. Sometimes it's 45 minutes, other times it could be 2 minutes. And this, of course, could be extremely dangerous in a fight if he's fighting someone with super strength, or, anyone with powers for that matter. If it happens to go off like in the middle of the fight, like 5 minutes in, he's kind of screwed because he has like no real way to defend himself then, if that's the case. But the Shade comes into this meeting, and basically not really much kind of happens with him other than him mentioning that there is a big problem that he has within the Shadow Realm. I think Shadow Realm, I can't remember if that's what it's called. I'm thinking of Yu-Gi-Oh right now. So but yeah, the Shadow Dimension that he gets his powers from, that he basically had a run-in with something big and stupid. And it's kind of interesting that he says that, because we also see green colors as he's like disappearing, very similar to what we saw in the previous episode. And of course, when it comes to big, green, and stupid, I think the first thing that comes to everyone's mind is the Incredible Hulk. But of course, this isn't Marvel, this is DC, so I highly doubt it's the Incredible Hulk, because that would make zero sense. But regardless, I actually have no idea what to expect kind of going with the Shade story like later on. But before he leaves, he does tell Rick like basically to not give up, and right before vanishing back into the shadows. Another thing kind of happening, we finally get Cameron back, and his appearance kind of happens after the characters wonder what other suspects there could be, meaning that I think the writers want us to think Cameron might have had something to do with it. But and even though I think he could have been involved in some way, I'm still going under the assumption that he wasn't actually the person that killed the gambler. But that's going to be a wait and see going forward. We do, however, see that his grandparents seem to be apparently honest with him about his whole essentially powers and what his dad's motives were, but where he stands basically on everything is still kind of a wait and see at the moment. But then we do finally get one last reveal, and that is that Cindy does have the laptop that belonged to the gambler, which earlier in the episode they were mentioning that they believe the killer would have the laptop since it wasn't with the gambler. But of course, if we're still to believe that Cindy didn't kill him, we gotta realize, or you gotta think that maybe she has the laptop for other reasons. She might know that everyone's being surveyed, and maybe she did something that she doesn't want the Justice Society to find out about, or at least the other Justice Society members to find out about. So I don't think she killed the gambler, but I also don't really think she's exactly innocent. Now, I mentioned earlier with characters with many names and how Sportsmaster might be my number one suspect, but I think, truthfully, the person it could have been, if it goes into the direction I think it could go, is Starman himself. Now, I say Starman because, again, he's a character that's gone by a couple different names. We go with Sylvester and Starman, but then we also go with the idea that, when you come back from the dead, you can't exactly get your ID back and be like, oh, hey, I've been dead for a while, so can I get a new, social security card and that kind of stuff. What I imagine he probably had to do is, in order to, track down Pat, I imagine he probably had to get a fake ID, a fake, everything essentially, with a new name, and so therefore it would make him a character with many names going forward. That's probably just a theory of mine of how Starman could be the person that killed him. And plus, you could also say that the times where it's him snapping might have been a bit of an act. And I say that also because while Starman's acting wasn't exactly bad in the episode, it wasn't the best. Like, I feel like we got a much better performance from him, like with his dramatic scenes in the previous episode, and also in the previous season, in fact, when we see him, a lot of flashbacks with him in the JSA. But here it's like the scenes where we see him kind of getting angry, it almost feels like an act, and I can't tell if that was done on purpose or not. So if it was done on purpose, then that's actually some really good acting. But if it wasn't done on purpose, then I guess maybe, I don't know, maybe it was a day where the actor didn't get enough sleep before showing up on set. I'm not sure. All I know is that his acting wasn't as good as I've seen in the past, and that kind of makes me suspicious and makes me think that Starman could be a suspect. Another thing that happens that I totally forgot to kind of bring up is that we get another scene with Crusher and Tigress together, and we see that Tigress is actually gotten a little bit stronger, and we see that the two of them are definitely hiding something as well. Again, kind of that whole thing of they may not be guilty, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're completely innocent either. I do feel like a lot of the characters that got interrogated in the episode or that claim to be innocent, I do feel like there's a lot that they're not telling the other characters, the Shade included. I do feel like there might have been a little bit more of an exchange between him and the gambler, but the Shade is kind of keeping that to himself. But yeah, we'll definitely have to wait and find out later on. But overall, guys, episode 2, another really good episode. Not as strong as episode 1, but I also wasn't expecting it to. It was really just kind of to give you a little bit more, tell you who the suspects are going to be. Again, I'd say when it comes to story, we definitely got a lot with the characters, but when it comes to plot, we didn't really learn that much new. I'd say we learned a little more new things with Cindy, and then, of course, the other supervillains that are living in Blue Valley, but not enough to really expand the suspect list, if that makes sense. But maybe it was for you guys. If you guys caught something that I didn't, definitely let me know in the comments below, and also just let me know your thoughts on the episodes, because of course at the end of the day, these are just my A+ opinions, but we here at A+ Opinions always want to know what you guys have to say, so definitely let me know in the comments below your thoughts on the episode. And then of course, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel. But guys, above all, just remember, as always, to keep it A+, and I will talk to you all later. Goodbye.